Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and this is the Breaking Free Show. And I am so delighted to start my spring with you. I hope you're all doing well, and I'm excited. And I want to say hi to Amnon.
Hello, Marilyn. How are you?
I'm good, and you?
I'm just fine. Thank you.
Happy holiday.
Happy holidays to you too.
Thank you.
And to all our
To everybody.
viewers.
Everybody.
Happy Passover. Happy Easter.
Happy whatever you say.
Yep.
Happy you, even if you don't celebrate a particular holiday, but it's a great time just to
Celebrate.
at anything, just being alive and being grateful that we're all here. So I know your time is precious and we value it, and we each and every week want to give you the best, the most interesting, fun, energetic, inspiring shows that we can. And today is going to be that day. And we have a returning guest, which I'm always excited for. So, you know, he's got to be good. And then my returning guest said to me, "And do I have a wife for you?" And I said, "Yeah, bring her on." So I want to introduce Aymann to you all. And he's here with his beautiful wife, Mira. And I want to welcome the two of you. How are you?
What's up? Thanks for having me back.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So first of all, tell everybody what you do.
I'm a reporter. I work at Slate Magazine. My work focuses on the Muslim American experience by trying to complicate the narrative of Islam in the West.
Complicated, you said? Uncomplicated.
Complicated, yeah. So I'm really, I'm never trying to proselytize anything. I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm not taking one position or another. I'm really trying to add as many different kinds of voices to contested ideas, so that way it refines our understanding of each other.
Absolutely.
So, for example, in the last episode, I interviewed my wife and my partner, Mira Abou Elezz, about the experience of the Me Too movement and how it was especially unique for Muslim women living in the West.
Yeah, I want to really get into that. And when you say, first of all, let's back up for a second. When you say you interviewed her for your episode, don't get confused with one of our shows. It's different. Tell everybody what you're talking about when you talk about your episode.
So I produce a show called Who's Afraid of Aymann Ismail. It's really trying to demystify the Islamic American experience, and not just from the position of Muslims in America, but also people who talk about Muslims. So, for example, I'll talk to state legislators. I'll talk to people who run websites that are geared towards Muslims in America, and I'm also trying to understand, complicated topics like hijab and Sharia law and and really anything that really comes up whenever we're talking about Islam in America.
Well, it's certainly beyond necessary that that education is power, and understanding each other, is the most important thing that we can do anywhere, anyhow. So what you do and helping us understand us, identity and what's to the core, as opposed to what we just think we see, is so important. And I love the conversation that we're going to get ready to have. So why don't you go ahead and introduce your beautiful wife to us, Mira?
Oh my God. Oh my God, where do I start?
I don't know. Go ahead. Start somewhere.
She's really important, not just to me, but everybody who knows her. So her name is Mira. I met her in a time of my life where I was already giving up looking for answers. At this point, I had rejected the conservatism that I was brought up with. So I was in a position where I identified as just culturally Muslim. And then enters Mira, who really, in one conversation, changed my entire world perspective and how I saw myself and my own relationship with others and my relationship with God or Allah and everything. So I latched on. I made sure to keep her in my life in the capacity of friends, and I'm truly blessed that it evolved and became something so much better. And I continue to learn from her until today. But it's not just how she talks and how she and what she means to people. She herself is an expert in Islam. She has a master's degree in religion and has a special significant understanding of the intersection between Islam and sex. So her voice is a very needed one and a powerful one, and unfortunately a rare one.
Thank you.
Really, can I ask you one question? Let me ask you one question before you start. First of all, I noticed that you both have two different last names. Why is that?
So I think culturally, in the Middle East, when women get married, we don't really change our last names. It's not like kind of like a necessary thing like out here in the West. And I just wanted to stay true to that, and keep my own last name, because that's who I've been my whole life. And I feel like a marriage is, adding to my identity and not replacing it.
Okay, because that's completely different right off the bat than probably what many of us would have thought.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Number one.
Number one.
We don't change our last names.
Oh my God. And you want to keep your identity. Oh my God. Who would have thought? So, and I just want everyone to know what I just found out was this is the first time that they have been interviewed together. So this is, yes, this is exciting. So welcome, Mira. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here too.
So where do we start having this conversation? Take us into the beginning.
So one of the most repeated tropes when we're talking about Islam in America is the treatment of women. And I think that's one of the ways that it's just one of the many ways that the far right has been able to distinguish Muslims from the West, I mean. So for example, there's a constant effort to make Muslims in America feel like it's an incompatible concept, right? So as a Muslim man, I'm constantly being asked, how do you treat women? How do you feel about women? Do you feel like your sister is a second-class citizen? Let's talk about inheritance. Let's talk about the treatment of women in places like Saudi Arabia. So I think it's a very sensitive topic, something that too many men in general are talking about, but not enough Muslim women are talking about. So I think it should really be an opportunity for women like Mira and any Muslim woman in America to really try to get their voices heard and not be that invisible minority.
Right. Now you said your sister. Now are you talking about your sister? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I was also talking, but I think that also applies to all of my sisters in religion, really.
Okay.
So I think this generation of Americans are really well connected to each other. So it's really easy for people to seek out voices, with the addition of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. So we are seeing an explosion, really, of Muslim women in America finding platforms to express their views and be known. So I think, if you don't already follow Muslim women on Twitter, do so immediately. So I can recommend you hundreds of them.
Yeah, you'll have to, and you can obviously give it to us, and I'd love to have it posted on our Breaking Free page. So Mira, go ahead.
Sure.
All right. So, first of all, when you speak, are you speaking for an American Muslim woman, or are you speaking for a Muslim woman?
When I speak for myself, but I think that's actually valuable in and of itself because I am a Muslim American woman, and that's my experience as a Muslim American woman. So yeah, I think the more specific the conversation, the more helpful, because all too often in these conversations, there are a lot of generalizations that are made. And so, making that more narrow and speaking about personal experience and personal knowledge helps uncover the nuances a lot more better.
Absolutely. So give me a generalization and then debunk it and then tell me the truth.
Sure. Just any generalization
Any
about
generalization about
women?
Yes.
Sure. There's a generalization that, the hot topic is hijab, right?
Right.
And there's a generalization that especially, women in the West who wear hijab are doing it because they're being forced by somebody, because it's not the cultural norm to wear a hijab in America. And so the idea is that Muslim women have some sort of, person behind them telling them what to do and how to dress.
And
the reality
yeah.
is that, just like any other decision anybody makes, there are so many more factors. And, there can be a kernel of truth to the cultural pressures, the religious pressures that influence a woman's decision. But that's involved in everything. Any decision that you make is involved with a number of cultural factors and people who expect things from you, right? But the reality is that a lot of, for example, I wore hijab in America for about 2 years. And it was interesting because, I started wearing hijab in Saudi Arabia, where that was the cultural norm, because I lived in Saudi for high school. And it was easy. Everybody was doing it. It was kind of part of the dress anyway. And then when I moved back to America, I realized a shift in my intention, and that intention became more of a political statement. It was more of a, here I am, I'm a Muslim woman, and I'm doing me, so it was kind of a motivating factor in my life to push me to pursue all the things that I wanted to pursue, to excel in anything that I was engaged in, so that I could, represent Muslim women in a positive and maybe different light than what people were expecting.
So then you chose to do what?
Then I chose to take it off. As you can see, this cap is not hijab per se. But I realized that I was in college when I was wearing hijab, and at that time, I began to question a lot of things that I thought I knew. You come in with like this naive, idea about who you are, but you realize that, I realized that my identity was shaped by things that I had been told about myself growing up. And at that moment, I had been kind of in the process of redeveloping an identity, relearning my religion, understanding everything that I came to know, starting from scratch, essentially, especially through my religion classes. And at that moment, I felt like wearing a hijab came with so much pressure and so many assumptions and expectations from other people that it was getting in the way of me discovering myself.
So can you see yourself wearing it again once you are clear about your intention?
So first of all, I don't think I'm ever going to be like super clear about, my identity, just because it's always in flux. It's shifting as time goes on. But I did come to a point where I, relearned the concept of hijab. And from that perspective, I don't see myself going back to wearing it, just because my understanding of hijab now is not that it is, obligatory on all Muslim women.
So I guess I'm Jewish. So I was born conservative, and my father was born Orthodox, and the things that I was told as a young child and into being a woman wasn't always what I have later found out to be more of the truth that I want to believe. How do you know what truth to believe? Because, when I was brought up, I was told that men and women sat separately because women, made more noise and were talking more to their friends. That's what I was told. That's what I was told, right? But later on, from a rabbi, I found out that that wasn't the case, that it was because women were the closest to spirituality, the closest to God, and they knew how to pray better, and that our beauty was a distraction for the men. Well, I like that meaning. But when you are looking at this, how do you know what's true? Are you taking something from here and something from there and putting it together and discovering it yourself? How do you know?
For me, I think intuition plays a big part in it. I think spirituality is expansive, is constantly changing, and has multiple interpretations because it's meant to be that way. And I think within Islam, there can be, an infinite number of interpretations of a single concept. And we believe that, the Quran is meant for every place at every time. And if that's true, then it has to have this infinite capacity, right? Because, you know, not only from person to person are we different, but, you know, from century to century, a lot changes. And so for me, I found the best way to go about that is to really try to understand the wisdom behind the teachings in a way that feels right to me intuitively, and to trust that intuition as something that comes from God. And that way it kind of gives me an opening to also change as I grow, and to learn things in a different way as I get older, and as my needs change, and as my understandings shift.
You know,
and another thing
go
that,
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to make another point,
Yeah.
that makes Islam especially unique in that way is that we don't associate any partners with the oneness of God, right? There is no mediator. There is no authority that's supposed to instruct Muslims the perfect way to be Muslims. And that opens up a huge potential and a huge capacity for Muslims to find out the best way for themselves to feel the closest to God. And in the end, we're supposed to be judged by our intentions. And really, if your intentions are pure and you want to do better for yourself and for your society and for your partners, really that's the circumstance that we're going to be reunited with God in the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what the point that's trying to make is that, you know, there is no central, we don't have a pope, you know, no pope is supposed to say, this is decided for this period to this period for these people. No, it's really all up to the communities.
I think this is the way it's supposed, from where I sit, I feel like this is the way it's supposed to be. We were given our religions, our way of life, our identity, society, in the BCs, DCs, wherever, early on. And through learning, we are smarter now than we were then. And I don't think religion or anything was meant to be the way we thought it was. I think what we're coming into and how you are personally identifying the wisdom for yourself is how it's supposed to be.
I think that's the only way it can work, really. If it's to apply and to help, you know, every person in every community live their best life, I mean, that differs so much from person to person. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to just, I was so excited to get into this interview that I failed to remind everyone out there that they are more than welcome to call in anytime. And that number, if you are on a phone, is 919-518-9773, or you can communicate with us through Skype at computers, that's plural, the number 2K voice. Again, you'll come in on voice, not on video, but we'd love you any way you come in. And also on our chat, if you like, you can put your name and come into our chat, ask questions there as well. And if you're listening to us on Facebook, come over to nissancommunications.com, and that's where you can actually partake in our chat, or you're welcome to listen where you are. We want you any way we can get you. And so if you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to call in and share with us, because this is really important. We're talking about some of the most important things you can talk about. And I don't have all the questions, nor do I have all the answers. So please come and comment with me. So women, you know, it's a big topic, that Me Too women, and, you know, the whole movement about what's going on. And I can't even imagine what that means in understanding it as far as a Muslim woman. I mean, it's just, I can't even imagine how you can even identify that. So give us some information. What's your thinking about that?
Sure. I think as women, generally, we experience this, you know, global order called patriarchy. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty universal. I think misogyny runs rampant, whether you're talking about Western society, Muslim society. And I'm glad that this is a conversation that's starting to have, you know, a big platform and become a hot topic. But unfortunately for Muslim women, we face this issue where if we do speak up about it, we are giving artillery to those people whose, you know, main purpose in life seems to be shooting Muslims down, to be spreading, you know, lies about our faith. And so when a Muslim woman wants to speak honestly and truthfully about, experiences that, you know, women around the world could relate to, there is a fine line to walk between, you know, how do I speak about my personal experience and not make all Muslim men look like sexual demon barbarians, which is an image that is already portrayed for them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
because I can't imagine. So, well, because I know what I imagine, so I can't imagine the flip. I imagine, you know, that you are controlled, that you can't speak up, and then if you do, you're not just faced with the Muslim men, but you're faced with the rest of society. So, where do you go from there?
right. I mean, it's hard because speaking up for any, you know, victim or survivor of sexual assault comes with a whole line of obstacles, including, you know, victim shaming, victim blaming, and to add on a culture where sex is taboo adds a whole other layer of obstacle for a woman. But thankfully, we have, you know, within our tradition, a lot of wisdoms that encourage women to be independent and to be, you know, strong members of society. So, you know, the basis for silencing women through Islam is completely unjustified. But we do see that, you know, there are just really strong cultural norms of meant to silence women, and this is for a purpose. It's to make sure that the public sphere belongs to men only. And I think that just gives us more fire and might ignite our passion to speak out more. And I think the fact that we see specifically Muslim women speaking out is needed for other Muslim women to feel encouraged to speak out, because we don't always feel included in the conversation, because again, Muslim women have, you know, specific issues that they're dealing with as well. So I think this is great. I think this is important to build a sisterhood. And I think the more we talk about it, like you mentioned earlier, the more that becomes a norm. And this is a way to break taboos.
Yeah, and another thing is that we're also, when we're discussing something as broad and general as Muslim women, you know, I think we really need to expand our view of what that is and what that looks like. You know, even in like this conversation that we're having right now, it's still being overshadowed by the imagery that we get from imagining what life is like in Saudi Arabia for women or Iran. But 20% of the Muslims in the world exist in the Middle East, and that's a minority. And even in America, and the 1% of Muslims that exist here, the majority of them are African American Muslims, not even Arab. So I think we need to recontextualize how we envision, you know, Muslim women as a monolith. I think we can't talk about Muslims in the world without talking about Malaysia, and we can't talk about without Indonesia, and also Iran and the problems that they have over there, and also Saudi Arabia, the problems that they have over there. But also we need to imagine Latin America. We have to imagine all the different people and countries that do make Islam in the world.
So what religion are we talking about? Your Islam. Where is it?
Well, I'm based out of New Jersey, so
okay. No, and you know, I mean, like the Islamic women that you're talking about, the Islamic men that you're talking about, where that religion, where is it? How big is it, and how true is it? Is what I'm saying make any sense?
I think I understand what you're trying to say. You're saying the question, like, where are the moderates, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like is this a modern Islam, or is this Islam the way Islam is supposed to be?
So
that's a tough question to answer. Just because, like, you know, the claiming what Islam is supposed to be, as we see, has caused a lot of problems.
That's part of the problem. It's like one person telling another Muslim how Islam ought to be practiced.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we're pushing for is a more, you know, like more multiplicity. And so our Islam, really for me, it exists only in my heart, right? And his Islam exists in his heart. But the idea of trying to, consider Muslim women outside of this image of, Iran and Saudi Arabia is really important, because it just is not representative of even the majority of Muslim women, like statistically.
Right.
Yeah. Like if we think about Turkey, who has had a Muslim woman prime minister, we wouldn't think of her as being disempowered in the same way that we would someone in Saudi Arabia who wouldn't be able to drive. Or even in a place like Pakistan that is, in a lot of ways being overrun by fundamentalist ideologies and insurgencies that have huge influence over over certain communities. Pakistan is still a country that has been able to elect several female heads of state, and same with Malaysia, So I think we wouldn't think of those women as being disempowered, when at the same time in the West we still haven't been able to elect a single Christian president in America who was a woman. So I think these are all, and the reason why we're adding this is not to deflect. Like, I don't want to play the whataboutism game. Like, I hate that game, to be honest. But what I'm really trying to do is trying to change the way we think about just the term Islam broadly, right? I think one of the problems is trying to characterize either what I believe or what Mira believes as being the true Islam or Islam as a whole. We're talking about over 1 billion people, right? So when we just discussed about how the way religion is practiced and how it really comes down to a personal belief in the oneness of God and this connection that we have with, for lack of a better term, the universe, how do we then apply the laws that have been created in certain countries as being characteristic of this larger faith-based identity?
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me, and I get exactly what you're saying. I mean, not making it cookie cutter, where there's different, which is important for us all to realize, right? That not all Muslim men are, taking their little girls somewhere to marry them off at, babies. I mean, not everybody, that's not the religion necessarily.
Yeah,
That's
I wouldn't
the man.
characterize the law that I think there was a law in Kentucky that was up for debate that was actually struck down by religious conservatives, who I think the law was trying to ban children under the age of 13 from being married. 13, and the Christian fundamentalists came up and said, no, it's our right to marry under the age of 13, and this isn't Kentucky, this is America. So I think it's we need to be able to talk about the patriarchy, and we need to talk about women's rights and children's rights outside of the scope of Islam versus the West. I think it's a global problem, like Mira.
It is.
Mentioned.
Yeah, and you happen to be Muslim, being having on a similar path, the two of you, which is really important. That you're out there more and more showing who you are, showing what you believe in, and just living your life, basically.
Yeah, I don't think either of us believe that, we have an inherent responsibility to be these, PR people for our faith. But I do see it for myself as a requirement only because of the environment that we were born into. 60% of Americans say that they've never met a Muslim, or they don't have any Muslim friends. 60%, like that's a majority of Americans that have never met a Muslim. But still, we see Islam and Muslims in the headlines every day. So I myself, as a media person who has been in the media for a long time, only last year decided to start talking about my faith and my religion as a responsibility, because I do have access to these tools and I do have a platform. So I didn't want to continue report on how people are reacting to my identity without also contributing to that conversation on a personal level as well.
Sure. So Mira, what direction are you going into with your work?
Direction I'm going into. So a lot of my work is a critique of the, dominant structures at play. And I think getting to the point that you might be wanting to get to, It's something that I do discuss a lot. For example, I like I said, did live in Saudi Arabia for a good portion of time, and the ways of living for women there are very much prescribed by like Muslim male clerics, because there's like this obsession with controlling women's bodies that doesn't exist only in Islam, but here in America, we're still fighting for, free birth control and the right to abortion. Whether or not you believe that that's okay, it's still the idea of it should be a woman's choice because it's her body is where I'm coming from. Mm-hmm. So in Saudi Arabia, for example, I met some of the strongest women I've ever met in my life. And some of them believe that, wearing abaya and hijab is the best way for them to feel closer to Allah. And I think that's perfectly valid. Some of them feel like their best contribution to society is raising children and being at home for the family. And that's perfectly valid. What I critique is a conflation of religion and politics and in a way that is limiting, in a way that is making choices for people without them having any say in it. And I think that's something that, you care about. And this, whole breaking free, right, is right. Kind of, I think that's exactly what, we're trying to talk about, the exact same thing. And that's the direction I'm trying to move in.
Mm-hmm. So what are you good? So you had said earlier that you eventually would like to do your work in a prison. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. So I worked as a hospital chaplain last year, and I want to be a prison chaplain. I think that, in America, we have a very big problem with the prison industrial complex. I think it's just kind of like a legacy of a racist institution. And within those walls, spirituality is probably needed, most, because it is a place that is meant to dehumanize the people within him. And so my goal right now is to be a Muslim, a young Muslim woman prison chaplain. And I think that exemplifies something that really isn't pointed out at all in our society, that one, Muslim women can be spiritual leaders, and two, spirituality is just as important to inmates as it is to, a mom and a dad working the daily grind.
So there's a difference between spirituality and religion, right?
Right. So I use the term spirituality a lot because one, chaplaincy is also termed spiritual care. And that's because, a chaplain, the way that I was working in the hospital, we were interfaith chaplains. And so, I was working with atheist patients. I was working, actually, it was a majority Jewish community. So I worked with a lot of Jewish patients. And that never got in the way because I'm not a religious caregiver. I'm a spiritual caregiver. And I think spirituality speaks to an essence that is a lot more expansive and broad than religion is. I think religion and spirituality go hand in hand, but religion is a bit more structured and involves a lot more tradition, involves, the rituals that bring meaning to people's lives. But spirituality is something very personal and individual, and it's like that personal connection that you have to something bigger than yourself.
And so is it more accepted for a woman to be a spiritual caregiver than a religious caregiver?
That's an interesting conversation, and that's actually a question that I'm finding answers to on my journey. And so when I was working in Los Angeles, and I think West Coast Muslims as well as West Coast Jewish people, I've found are a lot more lax than on the East Coast. And I found a huge embrace of, yes, Mira, like, not only are you the first Muslim chaplain in this hospital, but you're a woman too. That's amazing. can you do Friday services? Can you, you know, lead prayers? Can you give khutbahs? And that was incredibly refreshing and exactly what I saw fit for myself. But I have faced opposition from, you know, a larger Muslim organization because of these assumptions that are put onto Muslim women about leading, being religious leaders.
How do you?
So this is something that I'm battling right now, but I do think that, you know, anybody can be a spiritual leader if you can bring that out in somebody else, but to be a religious leader requires a level of scholarship and a level of experience that I think if I were a man, I would be valid for.
Yeah.
But unfortunately that, you know, that stigma still exists in some circles.
So, Aymann, so as a Muslim man married to a woman like this,
Yeah.
this must put you on a whole nother, I mean, what you said earlier about learning. I mean, you had to have something already like at the tip of your tongue and at the tip of your heart to go for it as opposed to rejecting it just from the get-go. So
are you talking about?
I'm talking about her. I'm talking about like
I'm
being
thinking
okay.
anything that I would probably scare off most men.
Most,
you kind of
yeah.
went for it. Yeah.
Thank you,
No,
Mira.
I think
I got you.
Somebody has.
these are all things that I wasn't necessarily conscious of, and one of the problems that I think exist in a lot of religious communities is this willingness to dismiss anything that doesn't make sense, right? And I think as a journalist, I've always been a truth seeker. And when I met someone like Mira, and I was already in this position where I was looking for something to make more sense, she made a lot of sense. You know, these are these institutions that we all have to deal with around the world, whether it be here in France or in the Vatican or anywhere else, that I think are imposing their religious positions on anyone else as being invalid. And that's something that I always rejected. That's something that didn't really make sense to me, especially coming from a Muslim background where we're all supposed to be equals in the sight of God. So I didn't understand how any religious institution could impose their way of thinking over another's. I think they could try to convince you using their scholarship and citing resources, and that's exactly what Mira did. These are all positions that she isn't just coming to. She isn't just like saying what she feels. She's coming from this background where she has a master's in religion, and when she was like making these cases to me, she cited these sayings of the Prophet and cited the verses of the Quran, and that made sense. That made a lot of sense to me then. So I don't want to suggest that all men are weak-minded and weak-willed, but we do grow up in this patriarchy that does position our voices over others, and that's something that all men need to overcome in order to really understand the world around them better. Because you know, people like Mira are out there who are just making a lot of sense but aren't being listened to, unfortunately.
Sometimes I think that information like this just has to come from a person to a person, not from a book, not from an article, not from a movie, but a person at a time, just like what you're doing. You know, with the video and a story at a time, a heart at a time, for people to even see the truth, the relevance in something.
Yeah, one thing I try to do is I try to simulate the experience of understanding. You know, when I'm producing these videos and writing these scripts, I'm never trying to make conclusions or bring in these ideas that I have. I'm always trying to justify them and trying to understand them and putting myself in a position where I just don't have the answers. And I think if we produce more journalism where we aren't assuming anything about ourselves or each other, then I think the audiences themselves will be putting themselves in the positions of these journalists and make themselves ready to understand something different that they didn't understand already.
Right.
And that's another reason why I think and I really wholeheartedly support Mira's mission to be a spiritual care provider, because she will be in these one-on-one position, these one-on-one scenarios where she could be listened to better, and she won't be judged just based on how she's dressed or how she speaks or what language she's speaking in, but really on the character of what she's saying.
So in spiritual care, what and it's hard for me to even ask you a question, because when you talk about spirituality, it's so big. I wouldn't,
Right.
unless you and I had a moment of something where we got into it spiritually, it's easier than kind of just going into it. So in spiritual care, what would that look like?
Sure. In the hospital, it was a lot of grief work and a lot of helping people cope with the difficult situation that they're in from a spiritual perspective, meaning whatever brings meaning to their life, using that as a source of hope to get through whatever seemingly impossible situation they're in. And so it's interesting because spirituality is so grand, it can become so personalized, and it actually is different from person to person. So like I mentioned, if I would walk into a patient's room, the patient would be like, "Oh no, I'm atheist. I don't need a chaplain." I would sit down and have a conversation with them and find out that their pet cat at home is their best friend, and they just want to go back and be with their best friend. And I would use that as a source of hope and inspiration to get past what they're going through. So in the prisons, I see that a little bit different. I think that some people might be in there for a long period of time, and I think that there needs to be some sort of redemptive process for them, a way for them to possibly forgive themselves for what happened or what they had done in order to move on and have access to the potential that I believe every human being has, because of like an innate dignity and worth that is in every person, because we are a part of something much bigger, because we all come from Allah or God or the universe or what have you.
Well, being able to take in what you know into a prison system, being as a spiritual caregiver, what an amazing place to kind of just take it. I mean, for you to be able to sit face to face with someone, or who's going to be living in prison for the rest of their lives, or somebody who has to put their head down every night remembering what they did or what they caused. For you to be able to do that is a really good use of spirituality.
Thank you. I think so too. And I think there's such a lack of, rehabilitative services that we offer to inmates. I think it's actually the opposite, this dehumanization of, just treating them like, criminals and giving them, little respect, kind of pushes them to act as if they were less than human, to not recognize that potential in them. And I think all it could take is, one person who sees them for the full human being that they are, to help them see themselves that way. And who knows what could come of that.
Right.
And even for people who aren't going to be in prison for life, some are about to leave soon, and they are looking for, a strong spiritual foundation so that they might not go back to on a path that they were on before, on the path that led them to prison,
Sure.
Because for some people, those are the circumstances that they're in, and it's just so easy to fall back into that. So I think it could do a lot of good.
Most certainly. And I also think that sometimes the thing that people reject the most is what at least stirs them up. So for the fact of your being a Muslim woman, I think is a really good use of being a Muslim woman, because for somebody to even reject it opens up a conversation, something that shocks them into something else. is important. So I think that's fabulous. It's a good thing. So knowing what you know, and this is maybe too personal, but knowing what you know about, how it is for Muslim women in America, for Muslim men in America, and all the things that are going on, how do you feel about people bringing a new child into this world?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Something that me and Aymann have discussed together as well. But I think for myself and Aymann, because we have this hopeful perspective, because we have this vision for the future, it might be just as important to have kids so that we can, help shape a new human life with the perspectives that we have. Although sometimes I wonder with, the earth dying and whatnot, if that's really a smart decision to make.
Yeah, but we don't, and I love what you said, because I think it's somewhat of I don't know of another word, but some kind of responsibility to hold that hope and to not give it up. I have a friend who's, not feeling very well, and I don't want to go to, she's not going to make it. I just keep looking for the miracle. And because it's possible. And it's possible that the world is not going to just blow up. That, things are going to, that I believe, no question, without a question, things are changing, things are going to change. Look at this. Look at this. Look at how people are speaking up. I think that no matter what, we may be forced to speak up even more now and do things that maybe we wouldn't have done before, but now we sort of have no choice.
Right.
We have to speak up. We have to give a voice. So what about you, Aymann? What do you think? Did you miss my question?
I did miss the question. Sorry.
About bringing in children into the world. How do you feel about that in this world?
Excited.
At this time?
I think this is going to be very different than what Mira said. I think it's important to to do that, only because I think children themselves are the only ones who can save us, and children need guidance. So I think if we were to really put our focus on children and the next generation, that's way more effective than just trying to convince the previous generation or the current generation. I think putting all of our faith in the next is probably our only way out of this.
And I don't think the only way to do that is to produce children of our own. I think youth, working with the youth, is extremely important. And that's also something that I've done and I hope to do for the rest of my life, because, they are the future. And young Muslims today in America have a very interesting future ahead of them. And we're born into some tumultuous times, so that's where a lot of our focus should be, for sure.
I've been meeting more young Muslims around the country and elsewhere, and I'm really excited. They are a smart and resilient bunch. It's crazy.
Well,
it's looking good.
It's looking good.
Honestly, I agree. I mean, even what happened in Florida recently, and all the kids that are stepping up, whether you believe in gun control that way or this way or whatever, at least people are speaking up. That's what I think. And they do need spiritual care. Teens, young adults, little kids, they need spiritual care. And they know something. Yeah. And they're powerful. And they want things a certain way. Do you see young Muslims, and I can't say the majority, but from what you see, do you see young Muslims, what direction do you see them going into? Maybe that's a good way to say it.
Sure. I see young Muslims being simultaneously attached to their Muslim identity, but also wanting to explore greater horizons. So within my youth group, I had a lot of just questioning and challenging the norms that our parents had raised us with. And I think that's really important, And, you know, whatever answers they find, it doesn't matter. Just the fact that they're questioning, I think, is really important, because that's something that is necessary for any type of progress. And I think what's holding us back often as a Muslim community is this idea that there is, you know, this strict rule book of what is and isn't a Muslim. And if you stray from that, then you've fallen off the path. I don't think it was ever meant to be, you know, a question and answer type religion. I think a questioning and skepticism is an inherent part of faith. And to me, that, you know, the youth coming up with questioning, you know, norms about marriage, about homosexuality, about women's dress, about leadership for women, those are questions that need to be asked, that have been, you know, shut down from being asked with our parents' generation. So that is really promising to me.
So I have this kind of vision of something, and you know, I'm usually not for loss of words, but sometimes going into this kind of stuff, it's so profound that I haven't identified the words yet that I want to use. But you both seem to be speaking out for, you know, like personal identity, and this is not, you know, it's not all like this, and you know, this is, you know, intuition you spoke about, and you know, we don't have to be afraid of Muslims and all. So what is at the core of the Islam that you feel?
So for me, like, you know, the literal definition of Islam is submission, right? And to me, that submission to a greater power, to something beyond you, can look like almost anything. But it's acted out in a way where you, you know, you have empathy for other human beings because you both come from the same place, or because you're both part of something bigger. You understand, you know, the responsibility we have towards the earth because, you know, you are connected to it in this way that represents a submission to something greater. Like those intentions to help make this world better in whatever little way you can, to me, represents a submission to Allah, and that is Islam for me. That is the definition of Tawheed, which translates to oneness. And it's kind of like this this infinite and eternal oneness is how I often describe Allah. And again, it's very profound, it's very abstract, it's very, you know, grand, but I think it has to be that way in order to include all the different ways that somebody can be Muslim.
Yeah. And for me, it's always come from a place of not necessarily knowing the answers, but the fact that you're exploring the answers, I think, brings you closer to God, you know? One of my favorite sayings of the Prophet that was reported, peace be upon him, was that be careful of those who say that they have the answers. And he was like, he said that the people who will say that they have all the answers are lying, because it's impossible to have all the answers. So stay close to those who are questioning things. And I think for me, submission takes a different form. It's more so submitting will to a greater being, therefore taking submission away from man and mankind, you know? People who would submit their entire existence to other humans and other kings and conquests and etc. But I think Islam was a principle and a religion that sought to destroy that. It was a submission to something greater.
You know, I wrote a book about men. I'm writing a series of books. So my first one is called In Just One Afternoon. That's my series name. And the first one was called In Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Men. And now I'm doing one called In Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Twins. And then I'm doing Millennials. I have a whole slew of them. This one is out on Amazon. One of my favorite stories of one of the men in my book was a young man who did not have a father, found himself in prison after following this man and this guy and that guy with, because they were all father figures, and finds himself in a cell with a Muslim. And this kid was skinny and little and, not right for prison, right? But because he respected this Muslim and the other men that were in prison, and when they prayed, they were the ones that took care of this kid. That's one of my favorite stories in the book, and there's 22 of them, including my husband's. That is one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
It just shows you, and that was in prison.
Right.
And it just shows you what's possible.
Absolutely.
When we respect, when we love, which is what your spiritual care is all about.
Absolutely.
Right.
And
yeah, I mean go ahead.
One of the most foundational messages in Islam is, to consider each and every person as a brother or a sister, right? And I think in prison, you kind of need that sense of ummah, or that sense of community, even more than you would outside. And that is kind of a reason why, a lot of people in jail end up converting to Islam, because of this very tight-knit and supportive group of people. Because when you love and support each other for the sake of God or something greater than yourself, it doesn't rely anymore on, it's not so much conditional. It's not so much, I will take care of you if you do this for me. It's more of a, I see you, you see me, I see you, see me type of love.
Mm-hmm.
That recognition of each other's humanity, I think, is something that's really, really important, and something really beautiful that is encouraged in religious communities. But unfortunately, a lot of times, us humans fall back on this categorizing people as, us and them, and having this restrictive idea of who is worthy of our love. And I think that's completely, antithetical to the basic foundations of Islam. And I love that story. I'm really glad that you shared that with us. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's always been one of my, when I talk about the book, and I have several, and there's 22 stories in there, I love sharing about that one. Because to me, that just, in just one afternoon, anything is possible. And that
Right.
just is an example of of the possibilities. So we are practically out of time. So you have both been so delightful, and I just don't even want to say goodbye. I want to keep talking. But just tell me, what would you like from our audience? Is there anything you want or need from our audience?
I need them all to send me any questions that they have. I really do believe that not knowing each other just sets us up and makes us vulnerable to vicious propaganda that's built to tear us apart. So if you do have any doubts, or anything that we said didn't make sense, or you believe is just not true, or anything, just ask us and let us know, and we'll respond. And there's no need for hostility towards one another.
So tell them where they can find you.
My email address is Aymann.Ismail at slate.com, and also just watch one of the videos, Aymann at slate.com/Aymann. Slate.com/Aymann is how you watch the series. And please send me any questions that you have.
That's perfect. And what about you, Mira?
Likewise, you can shoot the questions over to Aymann. He's a lot better at responding to all types of questions and suggestions. But I'll also put my 2 cents in if there's anything specific to me. And also, just forgive me if I misrepresented anybody out there, because that's often something that I feel when I see people speaking on behalf of me or on behalf of all Muslim women. So please, just trying, you
Just be
know,
yourself.
don't have any don't have any of the answers. I just want to thank everybody for listening and having an open heart and an open mind. And
and thank you for producing the show. This has always been fun, and I'd love to do it again.
Yes, would love you to come on again, because there's so much more to talk about, and just talking about the same things. How many times can we talk about the same thing and have it finally seep in? And I probably should apologize too, because sometimes I have no idea what's coming out of this mouth, but just trust me, whatever's coming out is coming from my heart from the best that I can. And sometimes, I don't know, it just comes. So I want to thank you both so much, and thank everybody out there so very much for being here. And Amnon, always for producing the show and having us here. And anything I can do, Marilyn at MarilynShannon.com. You can follow all of us on Twitter too. We would love you to do that. Find us on Facebook. You know, anything that we all can do, because I'm always asking, like, what's next? Like, what can we do? Because I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of questions though. So just follow us, and we'll see you all very soon. And to the two of you, thank you so much for being here. We'll see you. We'll see you again soon. Bye.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.